Internal Program Record. Object 1947. Classification, maximum restricted. Day 30. Fourth subject requested paper. Wrote 7 pages. Passed them to the duty researcher. Requested removal from the experiment. The researcher asked why. Fourth subject said, "They allowed me to write this. They will not allow me to say more aloud. Read the pages before opening the chamber." The researcher read the pages. The chamber was opened 8 hours later. Fourth subject was alive and physically unharmed. The pages described things that could not have been known by a person who had been in an isolated chamber for 30 days.
The Russian sleep experiment is a story that circulates widely on the internet. A horror narrative about Soviet researchers who kept 5 prisoners awake for 15 days using an experimental gas, producing progressively violent and self-destructive behavior, culminating in mutilation and death. The story is specific, detailed, viscerally effective, and has been read by millions. It is also a fabrication, not in the sense that nothing happened, but in the sense that violence and death were added to a real account to make the real account unbelievable. The function of the fabricated version is discrediting. If you encounter a credible report of what happened at Object 1947, and you have already read the internet story, your first association is with horror fiction. The fiction is the cover. The cover was designed to work, and it works. What happened at Object 1947 in 1947 was not violent. No subject died. No subject mutilated themselves or anyone else. The 5 subjects, prisoners, yes, as the internet version states, were exposed to an experimental gas that the program's founding documents describe as
a perceptual modulator, compound that suppresses the neural filtering mechanisms responsible for the standard human perceptual field without producing sedation or cognitive impairment.
Not a stimulant, not a sedation suppressor, a filter suppressor. The gas was designed to remove something, not to add something. What it removed, the subjects began to see. In those days, Soviet secrets were buried in layers of classification, hidden from the world and from history itself. Today, your data is just as vulnerable, tracked, monitored, and exposed. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from anyone trying to watch. Check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I found this program through a psychopharmacological research registry I was systematizing for an institutional inventory of Soviet post-war medical research programs. Object 1947 appeared as an anomalous file. A medical research program classified substantially above the medical research level, with a restricted access notation I had not previously seen applied to a single subject within a program. 4th subject materials. Separate authorization required. 1 subject within a medical program requiring separate authorization for access to their materials. Not separate authorization for the program, for one person's file within the program. I submitted the authorization request. It was granted. I read what 4th subject wrote. I understand why the access was restricted. I also understand why someone decided, eventually, that it should be grantable. The psychopharmacological context for the experiment is documented in the program's founding documents. In the immediate post-war period, Soviet military medicine had been investigating compounds that altered perceptual states without producing clinical psychosis. The goal was subjects who could function while perceiving differently. The standard approach produced hallucinations, which are clinically useless. The Object 1947 compound took a different theoretical approach. Rather than adding false perceptual content, it would remove the filtering mechanisms that produce standard perceptual content. The theory: human perception is not a window onto reality. It is a selective filter that presents a manageable subset of the full sensory environment. Remove the filter, and subjects would perceive what the filter normally excludes. What the filter normally excludes was the question that the program's researchers had not fully considered before the experiment began. The psychiatrist assigned to monitor the subject's psychological state was Dr. Pavel Volkov, 41 years old, from the Institute of the Higher Nervous Activity in Moscow. His monitoring notes are the most psychologically careful document in the file, a trained clinician watching 5 subjects undergo an experience for which he had no clinical category, trying to maintain scientific precision about observations that exceeded his framework. His notes from day 12 of the experiment.
I want to document what I'm observing with precision, because precision is the only thing that will make this record useful to whoever reads it. By day 12, all 5 subjects have begun reporting the presence of additional entities in their sealed chambers. I use the word reporting rather than hallucinating deliberately, because the clinical distinction matters and the clinical indicators do not support hallucination. Hallucinatory states in drug contexts produce inconsistency between episodes. The content shifts, the figures change, the logic is unstable. They produce anxiety or euphoria or paranoia, depending on the compound. They produce descriptions that vary when subjects are questioned repeatedly about the same perceptual content. None of these indicators are present. All 5 subjects describe the same population of entities. Not similar, not approximately consistent, but the same, with the same physical characteristics, the same behavioral patterns, the same apparent relationships to each other and to the subjects. The subjects have not communicated with each other since day 1. The chambers are sealed and separately monitored. They are describing the same things independently. This is not the profile of substance-induced hallucination. This is the profile of 5 people reporting on the same external reality. I am a psychiatrist. I am trained to distinguish psychotic ideation from accurate perception. I have spent 12 days watching these subjects, and I cannot classify their reports as psychotic. They are consistent, they are stable, they are cross-corroborated without collusion, and the subjects themselves are not displaying the affective or cognitive disruption that psychotic states produce. They are calm. They are precise. They appear to be describing something accurately.
He could not classify their reports as psychotic. A psychiatrist with training in the full range of substance-induced perceptual disturbance, watching 5 subjects for 12 days, and finding that what they were describing fit the profile of accurate reporting better than it fit the profile of hallucination. The entities were the same across all 5 subjects. The entities had been there all along. The gas had removed the filter that prevented the subjects from seeing them. By day 20, the subjects were not merely observing the entities, they were interacting with them. The interactions, as documented in Volkov's notes and in the subjects' self-reported logs, were purposive, not random or hallucinatory in character, but directed exchanges in which the entities communicated content and the subjects received it. What the entities communicated in the early days of interaction was observational. Descriptions of the subjects themselves, accurate details about their lives, information that the entities should not have had access to. By day 25, the communications shifted. The entities began providing information about themselves, about their nature, about the relationship between their presence and human perception, about what the filter is and why it exists. Volkov documented what the entities communicated as the experiment progressed. His notes from day 22. The researcher's voice on the tape is measured, clinical, but there's something underneath it. Attention.
I want to record third subject's account from today's monitoring session because it is the most detailed account we have received and because it bears on the fundamental question I have been unable to resolve: whether what the subjects are experiencing is generated internally or received externally. Third subject described, for approximately 40 minutes, the structure and nature of the entities as she currently understands it after 22 days of interaction. She was precise, unhurried, and used language carefully. She's a technically educated person, and she applied that education to the description. What she described: the entities are not rare. They are not concentrated in the chamber. They are everywhere, at all times, in every space where humans are. She described them as co-present with human space, occupying the same physical volume as our world without intersecting it, perceivable only when the filter is removed. She said there are many of them. She said they have been here, in this relationship with human space, for longer than human language has words for. She said they observe us continuously. She said they are not hostile. She said they are not benevolent. She said those categories do not apply to the relationship. The way wet and dry do not apply to a mathematical proof. She said the filter exists because human nervous systems, without it, cannot process the full information environment and still function as survival-oriented organisms. The filter is adaptive. It is not imposed from outside. It evolved. She said the entities know this. She said they have watched it evolve. When I asked her how she knew all this, she said, "They told me. They have been telling me for 3 weeks. I am summarizing." I asked if she found the experience distressing. She looked at me as though the question was strange. She said, "I found the first 3 days distressing. Now I find it difficult to remember why."
Third subject found it difficult to remember why the first 3 days had been distressing. 22 days into seeing what was actually there, the distress of the initial encounter had faded into something she couldn't reconstruct. She had been in the presence of the full environment for longer than she had been shielded from it. The filter's protection felt, from the inside of its absence, less like protection and more like a limitation she no longer experienced. On day 30, fourth subject asked for paper. The director of the Object 1947 program, identified in the file only by his role, not his name, called Moscow on day 31 after reading the 7 pages.
"Director, I'm calling to report a development in the experiment that requires immediate review at the senior level."
Moscow, proceed.
"Director, fourth subject has produced a written document, 7 pages, describing the entities in structural and physical terms that go substantially beyond what the subject could have observed through personal interaction alone. The document contains information that was classified before the experiment began. Information about the program, about the facility, about specific classified research programs that fourth subject had no access to before entering the chamber and has had no contact with anyone about since entering it. The information is accurate. We have verified it. The subject describes the entities as the source.
Moscow, can you specify what information?
Director, I'm not going to specify on this channel. The information should not be transmitted here. The point is not the specific content. The point is that a human being in an isolated sealed chamber for 30 days has produced accurate descriptions of classified information that he has no possible means of accessing through normal channels.
Moscow, what is the subject's condition?
The line went silent for a moment, the kind of silence that carries weight. Because the question wasn't about health. It was about whether fourth subject was still human in any way that mattered, and whether the things he was learning from the entities were things Moscow wanted to know.
Physically excellent, psychologically stable. He is not distressed. He is very calm. He asked to be removed from the experiment. He says the entities have communicated what they wanted to communicate through him, and that continued exposure would serve no research purpose. He says this with the manner of someone who has been asked to relay a message and has relayed it.
Moscow's response came through the secure line.
What do the other subjects want?
The director's reply was measured, careful.
This is the part I need to report carefully. Second and third subjects do not want the gas discontinued. They have said this explicitly. They say, this is a direct quote from third subject, "We can finally see what is actually here. We do not want to go back to seeing less." First and fifth subjects have not expressed a preference. They appear to be in a state of sustained absorption. The information in the 7 pages, is it actionable? Some of it appears to be. Some of it describes things we don't have a reference framework for. The 6th page, most of the 6th page, is in a script or symbol system that no one on our team can identify or read. Only the 7th page is in Russian. What does the 7th page say? One sentence. "This is for you. They knew you would come." Who is you? We have debated this. The researcher it was handed to in 1947 believes it was addressed to him. My reading is different. The sentence is in future tense construction. "Knew you would come," which in Russian implies knowledge before the event. The researcher had been in the facility for weeks when the document was written. The sentence does not read as addressed to someone who is already there. It reads as addressed to someone who has not yet arrived.
Moscow's orders were clear and final.
Continue the experiment at current parameters. Do not remove any subject who does not independently request removal. Classify all 7 pages at maximum level. Separate authorization for access to 4th subject materials. The 7th page is not to be reproduced or referenced in any other document.
The director made one final request.
One request for the record. What do we tell second and third subjects when the experiment ends? They do not want it to end. They say the entities have told them what the filter does and why it was put in place, and they do not wish to have it restored. They are making an informed choice, or what appears to them to be an informed choice. When the experiment ends, the gas is discontinued. The filter restores within 72 hours. They will stop seeing the entities. What they have already understood may persist as knowledge even when perception is no longer available. Or it may not. Note this as a research finding. File the 7 pages at maximum classification, separate authorization. Have someone determine what language the first 6 pages are in.
The first 6 pages were never decoded. The language, the symbol system on the first 6 pages, was analyzed by 4 separate linguists over the following decade. None of them were able to identify it as related to any known writing system. It is in the file as an unresolved linguistic anomaly. The 7th page, 1 sentence in Russian, is the only readable content. Here's the first contradiction. The official clinical documentation of the Object 1947 experiment describes 5 subjects who developed complex hallucinatory states under the influence of the experimental compound. The content was consistent with isolation-induced perceptual disturbance amplified by chemical modulation. The clinical classification read,
Substance-induced psychosis with extended hallucinatory content.
The prognosis noted,
Perceptual disturbance expected to resolve within 72 hours of discontinuation. Consistent with the compound's pharmacokinetic profile.
The parallel documentation, Volkov's monitoring notes, the subject's self-reported logs, the director's communications, consistently characterizes the subject's states as not fitting the clinical profile of substance-induced psychosis. No inconsistency between episodes, no affective disruption, no cognitive impairment. Stable, cross-corroborated, independently consistent reports of the same external content. 2 characterizations of the same subjects over the same period. One produces a clinical category that manages the situation administratively. The other describes 5 people whose perceptual access to something real had been temporarily increased beyond the standard human range. Here is the second contradiction. The program's operational journal, the standard day-by-day log of experiment events, characterizes the subject's progressive behavioral changes from day 10 onward as dissociation from reality, noting increasing detachment from external stimuli and progressive absorption in internally generated content. This characterization is clinically standard for the described circumstances: isolation, chemical exposure, extended duration. Volkov's parallel monitoring notes characterize the same behavioral changes from the same period as integration with expanded reality. Not movement away from the real, but movement into a larger real. The operational journal and the monitoring notes describe the same subjects displaying the same behaviors over the same period. One calls the movement dissociation. The other calls it integration. Both observers are watching the same 5 people. The difference between their characterizations is the question of whether what the subjects were perceiving was generated internally or received externally, whether the filter's removal revealed absence or presence. Here is the third contradiction, the document that should not exist. The medical registry that led me to this file lists fourth subject's 7 pages under the notation, unreadable, written in unknown language. This notation is accurate for 6 of the 7 pages. The 7th page, one sentence in Russian, is described in the same notation. The registry does not distinguish between pages that are unreadable due to unknown script and pages that are unreadable for another reason. The 7th page is in standard Russian. The registry notation is not accurate for it. Someone chose not to note the content of the 7th page in the registry entry. The content of the 7th page is what it is. One sentence. This is for you. They knew you would come. I have been sitting with this for a long time. I know the research history of the document. I know that the researcher who received it in 1947 read it and believed it was addressed to him. I know the program director's reading, future tense construction, knowledge before the event, addressed to someone who had not yet arrived. I know that the registry entry for fourth subject's materials has an access history with 3 entries: 1947, when the researcher filed it; 1989, when a Soviet official accessed it for reasons not documented in the access log; and the present session, when I accessed it as part of an inventory of psychopharmacological research programs. The sentence is in future tense. The researcher in 1947 was already there. The official in 1989 was already there. I arrived at this file through a systematic process of following cross-references across files I did not know were connected. From the Geophysical Monitoring Registry to the Psychopharmacological Registry, through references to programs I had already reviewed, the acoustic suppression programs, the isolation chamber research, the orbital tracking anomalies. I had been following a thread without knowing it was a thread. At the end of the thread, a sentence written in 1947 by a man who had been told 30 days into isolation what to write. I know I should not conclude that the sentence was written for me specifically. I know that the third person to access a restricted file, reading a document that says, "This is for you, they knew you would come," is experiencing a well-documented psychological phenomenon, the perception of personal relevance in general or ambiguous statements. I know this. I also know that the first 6 pages are in a script no linguist has identified in 75 years. I also know that the entity descriptions across all 5 subjects are identical and cross-corroborated without collusion. I also know that the classified information in the 7 pages was accurate. I also know that Volkov concluded, after 12 days of clinical observation, that what the subjects were describing fit the profile of accurate perception better than hallucination. I am going to close this file. I am going to log my access. The access log will now show 4 entries. The filter is something that exists in every human nervous system. It produces the perceptual field we call ordinary reality. The gas at Object 1947 suppressed it in 5 subjects for 30 days. Second and third subjects did not want it restored. The entities they described were consistent with what the other subjects described. The information fourth subject wrote was accurate. The entities are here. The filter prevents us from seeing them. Second subject said, "We can finally see what is actually here. We do not want to go back to seeing less." I'm going to close the folder. I'm going to see less. This is, I think, the appropriate choice. And a file.